At the beginning of 2020, we all saw what can happen when something like COVID-19 comes around. And most of us would say, well, that wouldn't happen again. Like stuff like that might happen, but I'm going to react differently. Like we all see the mistakes we made in allowing things to happen mostly. And really, and it was such a confusing time too, because they'd say, well, here's a medication that works. And they'd say, CDC say, no, it doesn't. And then they'd say, well, this will work. And then they say, no, it doesn't. And you can't trust the CDC, can't trust the president, there was just really a lot of unknowns. It brought up more questions than answers for sure. And one of those things that popped up in there was ivermectin. And the CDC was telling you it's going to cause all these problems, mostly with kidney failure, liver failure, things like that. But now what they've done is they've come out and said that they gave an unusually large amount, and it is an unusually large amount. Like when they were testing ivermectin on mice and rats, they were giving them like 1,000 times more than they needed. Like it would be like taking 1,000 ivermectin pills in an hour for like a day. And then, well, let's see what happens. Well, of course your kidneys and your liver are going to fail. You drink that much water and your kidneys and liver will fail. And they've admitted it. CDC has admitted it. Go to the CDC website, see their background on it. But beyond that, now we're faced with things like the bird flu. We're faced with like nuclear threats. We're faced with all sorts of different medical emergencies, so to say. And for the first time, maybe in the history of the world, you can get emergency meds sent to you, prescribed by a U.S. doctor from a U.S. pharmacy, just in case. Now, a lot of these meds I can get from my doctor, but he's only going to give them to me when I need them. When it comes to antivirals, the longer you wait, the least they're going to work, the least effective they are. And what I'm talking about is Jase Medical. They're the only company in the world where you can get potassium iodine right now. That's a new one they added recently, I think just in the last week. So in case some sort of radiation effect around you, you have potassium iodine on you, prescribed by a U.S. doctor from a U.S. pharmacy. Another COVID thing comes around, you got ivermectin on hand from a U.S. doctor and a U.S. pharmacy that you just have. Like, you can get it now. You don't have to wait till that happens. Antivirals, bird flu come around. This is something we just recently purchased, were the antivirals. Because, again, bird flu comes around, it affects your brain, and it causes your brain to become inflamed. And so far, most people that didn't take the antivirals right away have died. And I think that that's a good one to have around. The thing about having antivirals, ivermectin, and potassium iodine handy is that whenever the news is like, oh, scary stuff, everybody look at the scary stuff, you can kind of say, why, like, I'm already ready for that. Like, if that happens, I got a plan. If you're hit with radiation and you don't have potassium iodine on hand, it's not going to work out well. If you're hit with the bird flu and you don't have antivirals on hand, it may or may not work well. If you have ivermectin on hand and they come up with a COVID-24 or something like that, like, you're good. You don't even have to think about it. But the big one, those are all but what ifs. The big one that's almost a certainty is the emergency antibiotics. Having emergency antibiotics on hand for any scenario. And the scenario I want to give is we were in Portugal last month. It was my birthday present for my wife. I always wanted to go there. And we were in Portugal, and I had an infection. And it's I don't want to get too into it because it's kind of an intimate infection, so to say. TMI. But nonetheless, I needed emergency antibiotics. And I went about to go to some Portuguese doctor. I mean, I'm sure they're great. I'm sure their healthcare system is great, but I don't know where one is. I don't speak the language. I'm not sure they have the same medication as us. I definitely am sure my insurance would not cover it in Portugal. But instead, I brought my emergency antibiotics. And the thing about what Jase gives you is they give you 5. Like they give you 5 different ones in a book that says, in case of a snake bite, take this. And then in case of my infection, I had that antibiotic on hand. So I immediately started taking it. And by the time I woke up the next morning, I was already feeling better. No doctor involved, no clinic, I'm out of the country and I medicated myself. Thank God. Like that stuff is, it just gives you the freedom to be able to take care of yourself. Beyond that, the other piece they add is they have chronic meds. I mean, chronic meds. Think about that for a little bit. I'm on 9 different heart meds. I was on 13. Now I'm on 9. I'm working my way off of them. And I'm doing a good job, by the way. My heart's doing great. I could run 5 miles. I could probably run up a mountain. Feeling great. But I still need to stay on my medication regimen. And what we saw recently with the hacking of the medical systems was that if you needed your chronic meds, you couldn't get them. You couldn't get them. You could pay with them in cash, but your insurance wouldn't cover it because it was an insurance issue. But some of those meds, man, I tell you, my son was on a shot that he had to take daily when he was a kid. And when he first got on it, we weren't sure if the insurance was going to cover it because he had to go through a process. So I looked into, well, how much is it without insurance? And it was $40,000 a month. A month. And I thought to myself, well, I hope the insurance kicks in. Otherwise, I guess I'm a bank robber now. Like, I don't know what else to do. I mean, you do anything for your kids. And if it means I got to rob a bank, I'll go rob a bank, I guess. And it's terrible to be a father in that situation. So when your insurance doesn't kick in, it's a big deal. Jase Medical, I have found that all of these meds are actually cheaper through Jase than just getting them on your own as well. So I think it's important to have potassium iodine on hand, have ivermectin on hand, have antivirals on hand, have emergency antibiotics on hand, and have your chronic meds on hand. You have all those things on hand. There is nothing medically that the world can throw at you that's not a trauma that you couldn't handle. That you couldn't handle. I might have missed a few in there somewhere. I'm sure there's some, but generally speaking, this is, whatever the world's going to throw at you, nuclear war, bird flu, COVID-24, emergency meds, having them antibiotics. I mean, again, what I dealt with in Portugal was not a pleasant experience, we'll put it that way. But I was fine by the next day. One day in, I'm good. So there you go, man. I just believe strongly this is something that has to be talked about, shared, communicated. There's only one company that does it. It's Jase Medical, and that link is below.